boss. What he found out was shocking. She thought the bedroom was empty. Her sleeves had ridden up while she scrubbed the baseboard. And that was the moment Rhett Malone walked in. Bruising ran from her wrist all the way past her elbow, deep purple and ugly, the kind that doesn't come from falling. It comes from being grabbed, from being held down, from someone who stopped caring a long time ago. He crouched down to her level and looked. What crossed his face wasn't something he could hide. And by nightfall, the man responsible would understand exactly what it meant to be found by someone like him. If right now, and hit that notification bell. Now let's get into it. The night before had started the way bad nights always started in the Carew house, with the sound of Boyd's truck in the driveway, and the particular quality of silence that followed it. Lena had learned that silence as a child, learned to read it the way sailors read weather. Not what it was, but what it meant was coming. She had been home for 4 days. 4 days back in Brooklyn after 3 years of nursing school in Pittsburgh. 3 years of building a life that felt like hers. 3 years of sleeping without one ear open. She had come back for her mother. Clara Carew was 51 years old and had worked herself to the bone her entire adult life. And Lena had made herself a promise on the bus ride home. She was going to fix things. She hadn't yet worked out exactly how. She hadn't accounted for how quickly Boyd could remind her that some things in that house hadn't changed at all. He came in at 10:30, smelling like a distillery and looking for something to be angry about. He found it the way he always found it, in whatever was nearest and most available. Clara had made the mistake of asking him where he'd been. That was all it took. Lena had come out of her room when she heard her mother hit the wall. She had put herself between them the way she used to when she was 16, the way she swore she would never have to do again. Boyd had turned on her with the particular fury of a man interrupted mid-cruelty. By the time it was over, Clara had a swollen eye and couldn't raise her right arm above her shoulder. Lena had bruising up both forearms from shielding herself, and a cut on her cheekbone she'd cleaned quietly in the bathroom at midnight, pressing a cold cloth to it until the bleeding stopped. By 5 in the morning, Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with an ice pack pressed to her face and tears running silently down her cheeks. Not from the pain, Lena knew, but from the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been here before and cannot find the door out. "I can't go in," Clara said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Lena, I can't miss another day. He'll let me go." Lena knew who he was. Not Boyd. Her mother's employer. The name spoken in their house with a reverence that mixed equal parts gratitude and fear. 12 years Clara had worked at the Malone estate. 12 years of steady income that was the only thing standing between them and a situation considerably worse than the one they were already in. "I'll go," Lena said. She hadn't decided it before she said it. It came out of her the way necessary things sometimes do, without ceremony, without the luxury of deliberation. Clara looked up at her. "Lena, you don't know how things work there. It's not like other houses. You have notes somewhere. You always have notes." Clara did have notes. 4 pages of them, handwritten in the careful script she'd developed over 12 years. The routines, the preferences, the rooms and their particular requirements, the unspoken rules that governed a household like the Malone estate. She pressed them into Lena's hands, along with the estate's address, and a look that contained more apology than words could carry. "Pull your sleeves down," Clara said quietly, before Lena left. They looked at each other across the kitchen in the gray, early morning light. 2 women in the same house, wearing the same history on their skin, saying the thing that didn't need saying, that this was not the life either of them had chosen, and that survival sometimes looked like just getting through the morning. Lena pulled her sleeves down and walked out the door. The Malone estate sat behind iron gates at the end of a private road that didn't appear on the standard map applications. Lena's taxi driver had to be redirected twice. When the gates finally opened and she walked up the stone drive, she understood immediately why her mother had spent 12 years treating this place with the particular carefulness reserved for things that could not be replaced. The estate was enormous. Pale stone, immaculate grounds, the kind of silence that costs money to maintain. A housekeeper named Vera met her at the side entrance with a clipped efficiency that suggested she had opinions about substitutions, but was too professional to voice them directly. She walked Lena through the morning's requirements at a pace that assumed familiarity Lena didn't have. And Lena committed everything to memory, the way her nursing training had taught her. Quickly, completely, without letting the volume of information show on her face. She worked through the ground floor without incident. She was methodical and quiet and careful, and she began to understand the rhythm of the house, the way she understood the rhythm of a ward, where things lived, who moved where, what the sounds meant. The upper floor bedrooms were last on the morning list. Vera had been called away to manage a delivery at the rear of the estate, leaving Lena to work through the rooms from the list her mother had written. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall. Largest room, most particular requirements. Noted twice in Clara's handwriting with a small star beside it, that Lena interpreted correctly as a warning to be thorough. She knocked, waited, knocked again. Silence. She entered with her cart, leaving the door open behind her the way her mother's notes specified, and began with the baseboards along the far wall, the detail work that most people skipped and that Clara's notes flagged as non-negotiable. She was on her knees with the cloth working along the trim when her sleeve caught on the baseboard edge and rode up past her elbow. She didn't notice immediately. She was focused on the work. She noticed when the air in the room changed. It was the same instinct that had kept her functional in that house on Delaney Street for years. The animal awareness of another presence, of weight shifting in a space, of someone entering a room. She looked up. Rhett Malone stood just inside the doorway. He was taller than she had imagined from her mother's careful, understated descriptions. Dark suit, no tie. The morning still early enough that the day hadn't fully assembled itself around him yet. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her arm, at the bruising that ran from her wrist past her elbow, purple and dark and impossible to explain away. Lena pulled her sleeve down. Too late, and she knew it. Rhett crossed the room without hurrying. He crouched down to her level. This man who her mother had spoken about for 12 years with a reverence that now made complete, immediate sense. And he looked at what was on her arm with an expression so quiet and so complete that Lena felt something she hadn't felt in that house since she arrived. Seen. Stand up, he said. His voice was low and entirely level. And tell me who did that. Lena stood up slowly, pulling her sleeve down with the automatic reflex of someone who had been hiding things for a long time. She was good at it. She had learned young. But Rhett Malone was still looking at her with that same quiet, complete attention. And she understood with sudden clarity that the sleeve meant nothing to him now. He had already seen. I fell, she said. The words came out steady. She had practiced that steadiness for years. No, Rhett said simply. He wasn't angry. That was the thing she couldn't locate a response to. She knew angry. She knew the architecture of it, the warning signs, the way it built in a room before it broke. This was something different. This was a man who had arrived at a conclusion and was waiting, with genuine patience, for her to catch up to it. I'm Clara's daughter, Lena said instead. She's unwell. She asked me to come in her place. I have her notes. I know the routines. I won't be in your way. Rhett looked at her for a moment. How long has your mother worked here? 12 years. And in 12 years she has never missed a day. It wasn't a question. Lena said nothing. Which means whatever kept her home this morning was serious enough to override 12 years of habit. His eyes moved briefly to her cheekbone, the cut she had cleaned at midnight, and covered as carefully as she could with what little she had. And serious enough to send her daughter in looking like this. Lena felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear exactly. Something closer to the feeling of being cornered, not by threat, but by accuracy. My mother needs this job, she said. That's all this is. I'm here to work, and I'm capable of doing it. I'd like to just sit down, Rhett said. I have a list of, the list can wait. He said it without raising his voice, and somehow that made it more final than volume ever could have. He gestured toward the chair near the window, a simple, unhurried gesture, and then moved to stand by the fireplace, giving her the space of the room between them. Not crowding her, not looming. She noticed that. After a lifetime of men who used their size as punctuation, she noticed the deliberate distance he kept. She sat. Rhett looked out the window at the grounds below for a moment. When he turned back, his expression was the same, contained, unreadable at the surface, but underneath it something that moved like a current. "Your name," he said. "Lena. Lena Carew." "How old are you, Lena?" 24. "What do you do?" She blinked. "I just finished my nursing degree. I came home 4 days ago." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his face. 4 days ago, he repeated. He looked at her arm, at the cheekbone, and she watched him put the timeline together without any help from her. Who else is in that house? Lena looked at her hands in her lap. She had pulled both sleeves down now and sat with her forearms pressed together, the old posture of making herself smaller, taking up less space, being less of a reason. "My mother," she said, "and her husband." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. "His name," Rhett said. "That isn't his name, Lena." She looked up at him. There was nothing threatening in how he said it. There was something considerably more serious than threatening. The absolute calm of a man for whom the answer to this question was not a matter of curiosity, but of logistics. "Boyd," she said quietly. "Boyd Carew." Rhett nodded once. He moved to the door and opened it, and she heard him speak briefly to someone in the hallway, in a voice too low to carry. Then he came back into the room and stood near the window again, hands in his pockets, looking at her with that same measuring steadiness. "Tell me what happened last night," he said. And Lena, who had not told anyone the full truth of what happened in that house in more years than she could count, who had learned to summarize and minimize and redirect, who had become expert at making the worst things sound like weather, like bad luck, like nobody's fault, opened her mouth to do it again. And didn't. Something about this room, something about this man who kept his distance and asked without demanding, and looked at her like the answer actually mattered. She felt the practiced deflection dissolve before she could get it into her mouth. She told him. Not everything, not the years of it, but last night, Boyd's truck in the driveway, the silence after, her mother asking the wrong question, what followed, herself coming out of her room, putting herself between them, what Boyd had done when she did. She said it plainly, the way her nursing training had taught her to document difficult things, factually, without editorial, because the facts were sufficient. She watched Rhett's face while she spoke. His expression didn't change, but his hands, loose in his pockets, closed slowly into fists. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "Your mother," Rhett said. "Where is she now?" "At home. She can't lift her right arm. She has a swollen eye. She can't come in today. Maybe tomorrow. She's alone in that house with him." The way he said it made Lena's stomach drop. Because yes, she had left to come here, and her mother was alone in that house with Boyd. And the morning after was always its own kind of danger. The unpredictability of a man who remembered what he'd done and didn't know what to do with that knowledge. Rhett moved to the door again. This time he spoke to the man in the hallway long enough for Lena to understand it was an instruction, not a conversation. When he returned, he sat down across from her. The first time he'd sat. The first time the formality of the room had relaxed even slightly. "A man named Decker is going to your house right now," Rhett said. "He's going to collect your mother and bring her here. She'll be safe, and she'll be comfortable, and Boyd Carew will not be able to reach her." Lena stared at him. "You can't just... It's already done. She might not go with a stranger. She'll be frightened. She doesn't know. Decker will tell her Lena sent him." He held her gaze. "She'll go." Lena sat with that for a moment. The speed of it, the completeness of it. The way this man had taken the thing she had been carrying alone since 5 in the morning and simply handled it. Without drama. Without making her feel like a burden or a problem. Like it was the most obvious next step and he couldn't understand why it hadn't happened already. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Rhett looked at her steadily. "Because your mother has worked in this house for 12 years, he said. "And because nobody should come to work looking like you came in this morning." He stood and moved toward the door. Finish your list if you want to. Or don't. It doesn't matter today. He paused in the doorway. I'll be in my study. When Decker brings your mother, someone will come and get you. He left. Lena sat in the chair by the window of the most powerful man's bedroom in the city and pressed her hands flat against her knees to stop them from shaking. Not from fear, from something she didn't have a ready name for. Something that felt, distantly and dangerously, like relief. Clara arrived at the estate just before noon. Lena heard the car on the gravel drive from the second-floor hallway, where she had been working her way through her mother's list with the focused efficiency of someone who needed something to do with her hands. She was down the stairs before the side door opened. Clara looked smaller than Lena remembered from the morning. That was the thing about seeing someone you loved in the aftermath of violence. It compressed them somehow, made visible the cost of what they carried. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut. She moved with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain she hadn't fully assessed yet. A large man Lena didn't know, Decker, she understood, had one hand hovering near Clara's elbow without touching it, the professional consideration of someone trained to assist without presuming. Clara saw Lena and her face did something complicated. Relief and shame arriving simultaneously, the particular expression of a mother who has been found in a condition she never wanted her child to witness. I'm fine, Clara said immediately. The automatic response of a woman who had been saying it for years, regardless of whether it was true. I know, Lena said, and crossed the hallway and held her mother carefully, mindful of the arm, mindful of the ribs she suspected were bruised from the way Clara had been breathing since she arrived. She felt her mother's shoulders drop, the full weight of the morning finally setting down somewhere safe. Vera appeared and led Clara to a room in the east wing, with the brisk competence of someone who had been instructed precisely and was executing accordingly. Lena followed, helped her mother sit, helped her out of her coat, found ice from the kitchen, sat with her while she drank the tea that appeared without being requested, delivered by a young staff member who asked no questions and made no eye contact in the tactful way of people who worked in households where discretion was a professional requirement. He'll be angry when he finds out I'm not there, Clara said quietly, both hands around the mug. He'll have other things to think about, Lena said. Clara looked at her. What does that mean? Lena didn't answer because she didn't fully know. She knew only what she had understood from the morning, that Rhett Malone had set things in motion with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to problems resolving themselves in the direction he pointed them. She found out what it meant 2 hours later. She was in the kitchen helping Clara eat something when Decker appeared in the doorway and looked at Lena with the neutral expression of a man delivering information rather than an opinion. Mr. Malone is back, he said simply. Then he was gone. Lena excused herself and found Rhett in the main hallway, still in his coat, unhurried, straightening his cuffs with the methodical calm of a man returning from an errand rather than a confrontation. There was nothing on him that indicated what he had done or where he had been. But he looked at Lena when she appeared at the hallway entrance, and something passed between them that required no elaboration. Boyd Carew understands the situation, Rhett said. He won't be a problem. Lena studied his face. What did you say to him? Enough. Did you? He's alive, Rhett said, reading the question before she finished it. He'll stay that way as long as he remembers what I told him. He held her gaze. I don't make the same point twice. Lena stood in the hallway of this vast, quiet house and tried to locate the appropriate response to a man who had driven to her stepfather's house and accomplished in a single conversation what 12 years of her mother's silent endurance had not. She couldn't find one that was adequate, so she said nothing, which seemed to be the right choice, because Rhett simply nodded and moved toward his study. Your mother can stay as long as she needs to, he said without turning around. Both of you can. The days that followed had a quality Lena couldn't immediately name. Not comfort exactly. Comfort implied familiarity, and nothing about the Malone estate was familiar. But something adjacent to it. A steadiness. The particular piece of a place where the worst thing is not perpetually about to happen. Clara rested and recovered, the swelling around her eye reduced by degrees. By the third day, she was moving more freely, and by the fourth, she was restless, in the way of women who have spent their lives in motion, and find stillness uncomfortable. Lena watched her mother begin to quietly involve herself in small household tasks, straightening, organizing, the habitual industry of someone for whom work was its own form of comfort, and understood that Clara was going to be all right. That knowledge settled something in her chest that had been clenched since the night Boyd came home. Lena herself had continued working through the days. It gave her structure, and it gave her purpose, and it kept her from thinking too directly about the fact that her immediate future had no clear shape. She had come home to Brooklyn with a nursing degree, and a plan that had dissolved within 4 days of arrival. She had no position yet, no income, no apartment of her own. She had a mother recovering in the East Wing of a Mafia boss's estate, and a stepfather who had been visited by that Mafia boss personally and told something that apparently constituted sufficient instruction. She thought about that visit more than she meant to. She thought about Rhett Malone more than she meant to, which was a thing she examined with the clinical honesty her training had given her, and then set aside because it was not useful. On the 5th evening, she was in the library returning a medical reference she had borrowed. She had found it useful for assessing her mother's bruised ribs and had asked Vera's permission before touching it, when she discovered the room was already occupied. Rhett was in the leather chair by the window with a book open across his knee. Not a business document, not the kind of reading she would have associated with the version of him she had assembled from her mother's careful descriptions. A medical textbook, old, the spine worn pale, the kind of book that had been opened many hundreds of times over many years. He looked up when she entered. "I'm returning this," Lena said, holding up the reference. "I should have asked before I borrowed it." "Vera told me." He looked at the book in her hand. "How are her ribs?" "Bruised, not broken. She needs another week of rest before she does anything physical." He nodded. His eyes dropped back to the book across his knee, then came back up to her with a directness that she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things, completely, without the social softening most people applied to their attention. "You studied nursing," he said. 3 years. I finished in the spring." "Why nursing?" Lena considered the question. Most people didn't ask why. They asked where, or how long, or what she planned to do with it. The why was the more honest question, and she respected it enough to answer honestly. "Because I grew up in a house where people got hurt and nobody came," she said. "I wanted to be the person who came." Rhett was quiet for a moment. He looked at the medical textbook across his knee, and something moved across his face. Not quite pain, but the memory of it. The trace of something that had happened to a version of himself a long time ago. "What is that?" Lena asked, nodding at the book. She knew she was overstepping. She asked anyway. Rhett looked down at it. "Something I should have finished," he said. His voice was level, but the words had weight underneath them. The weight of a road not taken, that had never fully stopped being visible. Lena crossed the room and sat in the chair across from him. The same instinct that had made her a good nursing student. The understanding that people tell you the important things when you sit down, rather than stand. When you make yourself equal, rather than transient. "You studied medicine," she said. He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "The book is annotated in 2 different inks, old annotations and newer ones. You've been returning to it for years." She held his gaze. "And you assessed my mother's injury this morning before I did. You checked her eye tracking. That's not instinct. That's training." Something shifted in Rhett Malone's expression. The careful containment of a man who was not accustomed to being read, cracking open just enough to show what was underneath. Not vulnerability exactly. Something more precise than that. Recognition. 2 semesters from finishing, he said quietly. Then circumstances made other decisions. Lena nodded slowly. She understood circumstances that made decisions. She had been living inside them her entire life. They sat in the library while the evening moved around them, talking in the way that only becomes possible when 2 people have stopped performing for each other. About medicine, about the things that had pulled them both off the roads they had intended to travel, about what it cost to rebuild yourself around an absence. Outside the windows, the estate grounds went dark, and neither of them moved to turn on additional lights, and neither of them seemed to notice. When Lena finally stood to leave, The house was fully quiet around them. "Thank you," she said. "For my mother. For all of it." Rhett looked up at her from the chair. "You don't need to thank me." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." She walked to the door. Behind her, she heard the quiet turn of a page. Rhett returning to the book, to the annotations in two different inks, to the version of himself that circumstances had interrupted, and that she suspected, from everything she had seen in the past 5 days, had never entirely gone away. Clara was well enough to return to work by the 8th day. Lena knew it was time to leave. She had known it was coming, the way you know weather is changing. Not dramatically, but through an accumulation of small signs that add up to an undeniable conclusion. Her mother was moving freely again. The estate didn't need her. She had no legitimate reason to stay inside these walls, and several practical reasons to start figuring out what came next. She pulled her bag from the wardrobe and began folding things into it with the quiet efficiency she applied to everything. She was nearly done when Clara appeared in the doorway. "You're packing," Clara said. "It's time, Mom." Clara leaned against the frame and watched her for a moment. "He knows you're leaving." Lena kept folding. "Good. Then I won't need to explain myself." "Lena." Her mother's voice carried that particular quality that had always been able to stop her mid-motion since she was small. "That man drove to our house himself. He sat with me for 20 minutes when Decker brought me here and made sure I wasn't frightened. He reduced Boyd to whatever Boyd is now with a single conversation." Clara paused. "Men like that don't do things like that for housekeepers. You've been his housekeeper for 12 years. He hasn't looked at me the way he looks at you," Clara said simply. Then she left Lena alone with that and the half-packed bag. Lena stood with a folded shirt in her hands and was honest with herself in the way she had been avoiding for days. She was 24 years old. She had come home from 3 years away to a house that had never been safe and a future with no clear shape. She had walked into this estate with her sleeves pulled down over bruises and had been seen, genuinely and completely seen, by someone who had then quietly dismantled every immediate threat without requiring anything from her in return. That was what frightened her most. Not who Rhett Malone was, that he asked for nothing. She finished packing anyway, carried her bag downstairs. He was in the study, door open. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway with her bag and said nothing for a moment, reading the situation with the same immediate accuracy he brought to everything. "You're leaving," he said. "My mother is well. There's no reason to stay." Rhett set down what he was holding. "Sit down, Lena. I don't think. Please." It was the please that stopped her. She had not heard him use it before. She sat across from his desk and set her bag beside her and waited. Rhett moved to the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the grounds. She had learned that about him in 8 days. The stillness wasn't absence. It was preparation. "I'm not a good man," he said finally. "I want to be direct with you, because you've had enough of people who weren't." He turned from the window. "I run operations that exist outside the law, and I make no apology for that because apology would be dishonest." He held her gaze. "That is the life you would be walking into if you stayed." Lena looked at him steadily. "Is that what you're asking? For me to stay?" "I'm giving you the full picture," he said, "so that whatever you decide is actually a decision." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about the library 2 nights ago, the medical textbook with its 2 colors of annotation, the man who had been 2 semesters from finishing something that mattered and had spent years quietly returning to it alone in the dark. "Finish the degree," she said. He looked at her. "What?" "Medical school. You're not old. You're not incapable. The only thing stopping you is the decision not to." She held his gaze. "Finish it." The study went very quiet. Rhett crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to hold his eyes. "You came here 8 days ago with bruises on both arms," he said. "You protected your mother before yourself. You walked into a house you knew nothing about and did the work without complaint. You read a man you'd known less than a week accurately enough to say things to him that nobody who has known him for years has said. He paused. I'm not asking you to stay because I need a housekeeper. I'm asking because I have not met another person like you, and I don't expect I will again. Lena stood. They were very close now, with nothing between them. I'm not a simple addition to someone's life, she said. I come with a mother who needs protecting, and opinions I don't keep to myself. I know, Rhett said. And I won't be managed or made into something decorative. I know that too. She looked at him for a long moment. This complicated, contained, genuinely trying man who had crouched down to her level on a bedroom floor 8 days ago, and looked at what someone had done to her, and decided, quietly and completely, that it was going to stop. Finish the degree, she said again. That's my only condition. Something shifted in his face. He reached out and took her hand with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood exactly what the gesture meant, who was asking, rather than taking, for perhaps the first time in his life. She let her fingers close around his. Clara returned to work the following week, her position elevated, and her salary adjusted to finally reflect 12 years that had always deserved more. Boyd Carew did not come looking for either of them. Whatever Rhett had said at that door had been permanent and sufficient. Lena accepted a nursing position near the estate, the work she had always meant to do, being the person who came when people needed someone to come. And Rhett Malone, in the spring semester that followed, re-enrolled in the medical program he had abandoned. He studied in the evenings, and Lena sat across from him and did not let him quit when it got hard. Some things take longer than they should. That doesn't make them any less worth it. If this story moved you, hit that like button right so you never miss a story like this. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to begin.